Hi and welcome back to my channel. This video is explaining the enstoolment ceremony, enstoolment process. I previously uploaded a video of my dad and his enstoolment ceremony, and I've gotten a ton of questions from people who are not very familiar with the Ghanaian or the Ashanti culture and the traditions. So I decided to make this video, and I myself am fairly new to this as well. So I did have to consult with my dad on some of the questions and ask him because I'm curious too. So in order to kind of break down what the process is, and I know the one question that I received many times was me, like what does this mean for me as his daughter? And in order to get to that point, again, I have to kind of break down the process and what all of this means for him, what the title means essentially for him and his responsibilities. So in Ghana, there is Accra, which is the capital city, and Kumasi, which is further northwest-ish from the capital. That's where, Accra is, anywhere in Ghana is full of culture, but Kumasi and that's the Ashanti region, and that is where you will find a lot of this royalty culture. Accra is, I don't want to say more modernized, but they have, that's where you'll find more of the nightlife and more of the foods and customs and things that you'd be used to coming from the Western world. So that's where you'll find your bowling alleys and your movie theaters, your KFC, those chain restaurants. And not that Kumasi doesn't have that, but it's fairly new. Like it's literally within the last couple of years that they're starting to get, that they even got a KFC. So when I went, the last time I went was in 2016. I stayed in both Accra and Kumasi, and anyone that asks, I tell them that I liked it for different reasons. Accra, it's the city. It just, city life. I'm a city girl coming from Toronto. So it was the city. But I loved Kumasi because number one, that's where my family is. And because I could see the stark difference in just the culture, they're remaining really committed to preserving the traditional culture in the sense that not too much modernization is permeating there. One thing that stood out to me was even one of my aunts. She lives in the house that her family, like my dad and her family, grew up in, and it's not built like a modern story house that we would think of in the Western world. It's almost like a bungalow, but it's not even, the rooms weren't inside the house. Like each room, the door kind of faced outside. I wish I had pictures. It's kind of hard to explain, but yeah, it's almost like a plaza. It was kind of built like a plaza, which depending on the type of person you are, you might think that that's cool and that's the type of dwelling that you'd want to live in. But for other people, someone for like me, I wouldn't say the word weird, but it's not what I was accustomed to. But for her, she decided to stay in that home because that's what it means to her. It's her family home. It's where she grew up. And my grandmother wasn't even living there. She was actually living in, what we'd consider a regular bungalow. And even while I was at that home, in that neighborhood, some of the people that lived there were still washing their clothes by hand outside in a bucket. People were cooking outside. They had their wood and they started their own fire and cooking. They had a pot outside. And for some people, it'd be like, well, why aren't you using a stove, right? But they're still keeping that what makes them, that tradition very much alive. And a lot of it is by choice. It's not because they have to, it's because they want to. It's what they're accustomed to. So those are the stark differences. And then again, like I said, in Kumasi, we, the royalty that's there, and that's where all this comes from. So Ohene is king, and in the Ashanti region, we have the Asantehene. So that is the king of the Ashanti region. And the positions underneath, which is what my dad has taken on, is a chief. And so that's more of region. So it's kind of akin to like the Western world. The chief is kind of like the mayor of a town. In the Ashanti culture, it's not really a mayor because it's not really political. And the way that my dad explained it is, when you have a mayor, the people elect the mayor, and the mayor has a term in a democratic society. The mayor has a term, and you're either reelected at the end of your term, or you're not, or you do something to kind of lose that title. Whereas in this culture, it's passed down lineage, so you're not elected into the position, and there is no term. It's basically until you as the person say, I don't want to do this anymore, which my dad says rarely ever happens, until sadly the person passes on, or you'd have to do something like really heinous and have the title stripped from you by the Asantehene. So that is that. So these chiefs, they kind of preside over a certain town or community or region within the Ashanti region. And my dad says that he has to meet now with the king 3 times a week, in and around 3 times a week, kind of whenever the king says, hey, we need to meet, we need to preside over some matters, come and sit and let's discuss. So like, almost like a council meeting. And that's kind of what he's tasked with presiding any matters that are within his region. So anything to do with kind of land and zoning. If anybody wants to kind of come in and build any kind of commercial properties, it would have to go through my dad first. And even people who are politically, like in political parties, who are elected officials, still have to come and confer with the chief, and sometimes even with the king, the Asantehene, before they are granted whatever it is that they're looking for. So in that region, being part of this royalty is almost they almost have more power than an elected official, like than political parties. So it's pretty cool. And there are some things that my dad also has to abide by while he's out in public. So no smiling, no laughing. He just kind of has to just always be kind of calm, cool, collected. So no laughing, no smiling, no chewing gum. And with that being said, when he's in the video, if you link back to the video, you'll see that he had people that were kind of surrounding him and carrying an umbrella over his head. So that is something that anytime he's somewhere in public at an event, he will have someone or some people carrying this umbrella over his head. Anytime before he sits, and he will have a designated seat to sit on. Anytime before he sits, my dad was telling me that they'll have to check the chair, make sure that it's sturdy enough for him to sit, and then they'll lay a special cushion before he sits down. Once he does sit, if anyone wants to speak to him, they first have to approach him and keep a distance. I'm not sure what the exact distance is, but it's not an exact distance, but anyone who's there would know not to come too close. And then you kind of wait to be called by one of the people that will be sitting on either side of my dad, and that person will have to speak to the person. My dad calls a linguist, will have to speak to that person and basically say what it is that they want to address my dad with. And of course, they're not whispering, so my dad will also be able to hear. But at that point, it's up to him if he decides if he wants to respond to the person, or, if not. And so, like I said, it's a highly regarded position. So even with that comes the respect and stuff, and keeping distance, knowing when to speak. And my dad's not allowed to drive himself to any of these events. So he has a driver now that will drive him to these places. And I was asking him, so I was like, if you're just going to like someone's wedding, just like as yourself, he's like, that's a little bit different. But if it's anything ceremonial or anything where they will basically acknowledge that he's there and the position that he holds. So if they say this is chief, coming to bless us or with his presence, that's when he has to take on that traditional role. But if he's just attending somewhere as himself, then it's cool. Now, for us, or for me as his daughter, for us as his kids, what that means is the biggest thing is if we were to go to Ghana right now, the king, the Asantehene, would ask to, speak with me, and then he would give me a title or a role. So maybe I would become, chief of the education system or something. I'm just saying that because I love working with kids, and, I believe that children education very important. So he might task me with that, of going around and trying to find a way to make the education or the school system better in the region. Or maybe even just finding a way maybe to more recreation programs or something like that, and just give me that title, and that is what I would be tasked to do. I can also have input, but it would be his final say, his final call on what my role is or what my title is and what I'm to do while I'm there. So that's actually pretty exciting because like I said, I love kids and I believe education is important. So that is probably what I will suggest to him when I am presented with the opportunity, that I would very much love to do some things involving children and education. And then with that being said, as I said, with my dad being a chief, people just can't approach him. And with the king, it's even more strict. Like, you definitely have to keep your distance, and he will tell you, to come forward. And again, he can decide he doesn't want to see you. But with me, I am allowed to be in his vicinity. So I can, again, I still have to kind of like wait for him to say, okay, you may come forward. But the chances of me being denied is very low compared to someone who isn't the child of one of the other chiefs. And with that being said, my dad is allowed to be in his presence too, because my dad was also saying that some of the other chiefs, there's also a hierarchy within that where some of them still need to ask their permission. Like, they want to be able to sit in the same room as him if they were even having a council meeting, whereas my dad is allowed that opportunity. So that's pretty much it. If you have any other questions, you're free to ask. Again, you're not elected, so people aren't voted into this position. It's by lineage, and once you're there, you're kind of there for life. And you saw the traditional attire. This weekend, actually, the Asantehene and a lot of the other chiefs are in Memphis for an event. So my dad will be in attendance, and I'm hoping to get some footage from that so that I can post that as well. And if you have any other questions, just let me know. I will ask. This is all new to me too, and I love learning about this. And hopefully I can go to Ghana next year and I can actually take part in this, like, in person, and really immerse myself in this role that I've essentially been given.